Chapter 3, Being the Sad Cautionary Tale of the Orange Roughy. If you look at a map of the world or globe and see how 2/3 of the earth is covered by oceans, you might imagine that there are a lot more fish in the world than there really are. That is exactly what most people did think for many years. The ocean that fishermen knew was full of fish, but that was because they did not go very far. Sea life, as with land life, depends on sunlight. Wherever the sea is strongly penetrated by sunlight, vegetable nutrients grow. The area becomes rich in nitrates, which stimulates the growth of plankton. Plankton is a grouping of many tiny plants and animals, some of them only one cell, that drift in the sea. Some, such as phytoplankton, are plants. Others, such as zooplankton, are animals. Phytoplankton, floating plants, come in many types and shapes, but are so small that they can only be seen through a microscope. Like land-based plants, they are green because they are filled with a substance called chlorophyll, which uses energy from sunlight to create sugars for food, which in turn create oxygen. This process, which sustains plant life on Earth, is called photosynthesis. It is a very old system created some 3.5 billion years ago when the only living organisms were microscopic and the earth was full of gases. Phytoplankton are found where the sunlight penetrates the sea, and since this is the beginning of the sea's food chain, this is where the most life is found. Because there are so many phytoplankton, there are huge numbers of slightly larger creatures called zooplankton, which eat phytoplankton. Zooplankton range in size from microscopic to almost 8 inches. Some zooplankton are actually larvae that eventually change into worms, mollusks, crustaceans, coral, and even some types of fish. They also help to control one of the earliest forms of life, bacteria. A sea with plentiful zooplankton provides plentiful food for tiny shrimp-like creatures called krill. Krill are one of the smallest forms of sea life that humans actually eat, though they're so small that most people don't even bother with them. This is a good thing because much sea life depends on krill, and these creatures would not do well if they had to compete with humans for food. Herring eat krill, for instance, as do giant humpback whales. Several times the size of an elephant, the humpback whale is one of the largest animals on Earth, and yet it feeds on one of the tiniest forms of life in the world. Some fish swim near the bottom of the oceans and can swim up to eat the smaller fish or down to eat the shellfish living on the sea floor. These are slow, steady hunters who stay close to home and whose muscles constitute the white meat that most people prefer to eat. Fish with white meat, such as cod, haddock, flounder, and halibut, are the most appreciated and the highest priced fish available. But there are also fish that swim in the middle waters, just a little below the surface, fast, hard-swimming animals who sometimes travel long distances. These fish, such as sardines, anchovies, herring, mackerel, and even a few large fish such as tuna, have muscles that are darker and flesh that's a little oilier than the white meat fish. By netting large quantities of these cheaper fish, a fisherman could still earn a good living. The smaller of these middle water fish, which feed on krill, that feed on zooplankton, that feed on phytoplankton, are eaten by the larger white meat fish in the bottom. Trying to escape hungry predators, such as cod, the smaller fish from the middle depths swim to the surface for safety, and that's just where seabirds swoop down and eat them. Darwin was right. A healthy ecosystem is based on the destruction of life and the struggles for survival among species, and it is in such systems that men in the form of fishermen are drawn to take part in the killing. 90% of the fishing they do is within 200 miles of land. Farther out to sea, there is life and there are fish, but many of them live at great depths that have not been explored because until recently we didn't have the ability to reach that far below surface. Most attempts to commercialize fish hauled in from farther out to sea have proven disastrous in a very short time because of our lack of understanding of the deep water life system. The orange roughy is an excellent example. Fishermen were not capable of reaching the orange roughy until the 1970s. But once they did, eating orange roughy became fashionable in Australia, the United States, and many other places in the world well into the 1990s. It was not understood that this species was not like other fish we had known. For one thing, many scientists think that the orange roughy lives for 150 years, which is at least 5 times as long as most of the fish we know. The age is disputed, with some saying it lives even longer, but the problem with this long-lived species is that it grows very slowly. The fish doesn't even become capable of producing offspring until it's 20 years old, which would be an older fish in most of the species we know. This means that many orange roughies that appear to be mature are actually quite young and haven't reproduced. The large-scale killing of fish that haven't yet reproduced will in time destroy them, and that's exactly what happened to the orange roughy populations off New Zealand and Australia, where the fish was first discovered. After a little more than 10 years, the Australian orange roughy population was only 10% of what it had been in the 1990s. So fishermen went looking somewhere else for this popular new species and found it in the Atlantic Ocean off southern Africa, as well as further north from Monaco to Iceland. I'm sorry, that should be Morocco to Iceland. Just as it happened with the Australian orange roughy, these populations very quickly showed signs of vanishing. The sad story of how the orange roughy became one of the world's most threatened fish populations within decades of being discovered by us should serve as a caution to what could happen. Who knows what years of dragging nets through these deep, unknown oceans is doing to deep water ecosystems. We are probably damaging and destroying species we haven't even discovered yet and will never know about. It would follow the laws of Darwin if it turned out the rare fish in the hard-to-reach places had fewer chances of survival than large populations of more familiar fish living in ideal environments closer to shore.